Change isn't just coming, it's already here. This is Ask for Change podcast, hosted by leadership expert Meridith Powell, brings you weekly conversations with leaders and experts who are redefining success in a world of disruption. Let's begin today's journey and turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage.
Hey, this is Meridith Powell, and welcome to Ask for Change. And yeah, let's turn uncertainty into competitive advantage. And I've got to tell you, we've got a real expert today when it comes to one of the most important areas of focus if you want to turn uncertainty into competitive advantage. And that is the experience that your customers are having. I want you to welcome to the podcast, Jeanne Walters. I got to tell you, she is one of the leading voices in customer experience today. She's an award-winning speaker, author, founder of Experience Investigators, which I got to ask her about, and creator of the Customer Experience Investigation Framework. And lucky for you, she's got a brand new book. Probably by the time you're watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, that book will be out. If not, you need to pre-order it. It is called Experience is Everything. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Meridith. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am excited to dive in because I got to tell you, in a world where everything seems to be a commodity, customer experience seems to be the really one big differentiator, the one place where you can get leverage. It also seems to be the great equalizer, right? Like in a world where I can buy a pen anywhere, I don't care if I get it from a big corporation or if I get it from a small mom and pop shop, but I do care about the experience. So I want to back up and I want to get a little bit of your origin story. How did you go down the lane of customer experience anyway?
Yeah, I love this question because it's never like, oh, I was in kindergarten and I decided, right? It was a very crooked path, which I think most of us have. But essentially, I was old enough to remember when what I call the dawn of kind of the big internet. This is when the internet had been around for a while, but corporations, different big entities started realizing we need more than brochures online. We need to do things. And I was working with a large insurance company, and they were really one of the first ones who announced, you're going to be able to do online quoting and purchasing online, which had never been done before. And I was part of that team. And I remember the moment I looked around and I thought, there's nobody here for the customer, because for decades, there had always been a barrier. There was a broker or an agent. So every single piece of communication said things like the insured. And I literally, this is when also youthful naivete came in because I didn't know better. So I just went up to, and I was a consultant. I wasn't even on their staff. I went up to their general counsel and basically said, no, we've got to change all this language because we're talking directly to the customer now. And I think he just thought I was entertaining. And we had this 90-minute conversation where by the end, he's like, all right, I get it now. But we think about that moment in time and how dramatically everything changed.
Yeah.
Because suddenly customers had access. So that's when I was at a traditional communications marketing firm. I was working with my brother. We were partners, and we made a pivot in that moment. We said, you know what, this is about more than marketing communications. This is about customer experience and how we treat people throughout the time that they're a customer, not just getting them in the door. And that changed everything.
So let me ask you this. So in today's marketplace, I kind of remember that world too. I remember, this is how old I am. I remember the years when First Union Bank, when it used to be around, came out with the Bank of the Future, and they were too far ahead of themselves. Like they had all this self-serve stuff, and it completely bombed.
Mm-hmm.
But what has the terminology for customer experience, has the definition changed? Because exactly since post-COVID, I mean, I definitely want to interact with individuals. I want to get a hold of somebody. But does it now tend to expand to every interaction, every touch point that a customer has?
Yeah. And that's, it's funny because it does get tossed around as a term, and it has different definitions based on where you are and who you talk about. But essentially the way I define it, it is every single interaction that you have from before you even become a customer, when you become aware of the brand, when you start thinking about, hey, is this for me? All the way through to either when you leave or when you're a lifelong advocate and you're telling all your friends about the brand. The tricky part here is that humans, we don't make a lot of sense, right? So we
Yeah.
say we want all these features and then we don't use them, or we give people great feedback, but then we're shopping around. And so what we have to realize is it's not only the reality of those interactions, it's the perception of what your customers are experiencing. And all of that is based on expectations. Because if I expect high-end service and I get, not so great service, I'm not going to be super happy. But if I am, desperate for a product and your company is the only one that can carry it and
Yeah.
give it to me on time, if it shows up in a box that's a little beat up, I'm going to be okay with that because that's not what I'm expecting. So we really have to get into the psyche of our customers as well as understanding the expectations that we are setting along every step of that journey.
So this is such a great transition to your brand new book. Experience is everything. Make
Can I show it
every
off?
single
I've got my author
absolutely.
copy.
Yeah, nice, nice. It's like a child, right? It's so
Yeah.
exciting. So what was the genesis behind this book, and what do you mean by experience is everything?
Yeah, the genesis was really I've been working with different organizations of all sizes for more than 2 decades now, and I kept seeing the same kind of sticky points. I wouldn't call them mistakes, but we don't treat customer experience like any other part of the business. We kind of treat it like fairy dust.
Mhm.
There are a lot of leaders who stand up at town halls and say, "We're going to put the customer first," or "We will be customer centric." But then they don't give people the tools. They don't define what that means. There are no real measurements around it outside of things like customer feedback. But customer feedback, it's actually not results when
Right.
you get right down to it. So the whole idea was this approach that we've developed, which is about making sure you have alignment around a mindset, a strategy, and a discipline. And so we have different tools to do that. We have different ways of defining that because otherwise, every single thing feels like a priority in customer experience. And when you have everything as a priority, nothing actually gets done. And so this is about making sure it's not just about the talk and the communication around it. It's about developing a strategy so you can get the business results that matter. And then it's having the business discipline to actually back it up. And
So,
so,
oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
I
No,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to say that the idea of experience is everything is really like we can't do this well without a strong culture around this. We can't do this well without intentional leadership around it. We can't do this well without real business metrics and rigor. And often we treat it like, well, everybody knows what a great customer experience is, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah. So I want to break these pieces down that you say that customer experience is a mindset, a strategy, and a discipline.
Mhm.
Kind of define, I mean, is it mindset first, strategy second, discipline last, or kind of define those a little bit more?
I mean, in an ideal world, I would say yes to that, but we don't live in an ideal world. So I often say we meet our clients where they are because sometimes they're like, yeah, we already have a customer promise. And even though it's kind of vague and people don't get it, we can't go through that process again. But in an ideal world, we would start with mindset. And what I like to do is create something that is very much short, concise, something people can internalize. Because if we both just go into this thinking, I know what a great customer experience is, you might think it's to be the fastest, and I might think it's to be really accurate. And sometimes those things don't align. And it doesn't mean one is wrong or right. It just means that if we're not aligned around that, then we will create an inconsistent customer experience. And that's what actually leads to mistrust. So the alignment, we use a tool called a customer experience mission statement where we define who are we and how do we show up no matter what, both to our customers and to one another inside the organization, because that has to be aligned. And then the strategy piece is, again, treating this like you would never say to a sales team, well, your goal this year is to sell more. And
Right.
then after a few months go, well, I guess that didn't work. So I guess we're going to get rid of sales. Like that would never happen because we accept it's part of doing business. Same thing with customer experience. What are the organizational goals and how can we pull the right levers in customer experience to achieve those? And how will we measure success? And then the discipline is figuring out how do we do this on a daily basis and who do we need and the processes, tools, technology, all of those things. So it's really kind of exercising a new muscle in a lot of organizations because it's easy to think, and I've seen massive organizations and they literally have 1 or 2 people on the customer experience team.
Yeah.
And we have to take it seriously, in my humble opinion.
Is customer experience, I mean, is it the team's responsibility to, like, where does it fall in the organization?
Well, I think the leadership is really important across the organization. So we have to have leaders at the very top, the executives, who understand that this is part of everybody's role in a way. We cannot do this with just a team, because the customer experience team might be responsible for reporting, it might be responsible for gathering the insights from customers. But if all the insights are telling you, you know what, the mobile app is a huge point of friction,
Yeah.
and well, they're not the mobile app developers, right? So we have to make sure that we are communicating and letting those insights affect decisions throughout the organization. And then the leadership, we have to put a stake in the ground and say, you know what, this is what we're doing on behalf of our customers. We can't be all things to all people. So we have to make sure we are defining who are we to our customers, and that has to come from the top. But I also believe that, I've seen a lot of what I call customer experience change agents who are in all sorts of departments, and they know this is important, and they're doing their best where they are to kind of spread the word, get people engaged. A lot can happen that way as well. So we have to kind of start where we are, wherever we are with the organization, but then we have to believe that this isn't just one person or one team. We're all responsible for the customer experience. I had somebody come up to me after a keynote it was right after we kind of got back to work after the pandemic.
Yeah.
And she came up and she said, I used to think supply chain was like this other world, right? It didn't affect me. But what impacted customer experience more than supply chain during that time?
Right.
And so they had to work together. So that's what we need throughout the organization.
So, one of the biggest shifts I feel like, that I've seen is that when I was coming up in the corporate world, I felt like for those of us that touch the customer, we always knew customer experience. Like, I mean, back in the day when I was a banker, I mean, we would have rules and we would have policies and we would have procedures. And then you'd have something that a really good customer needed, and it was outside of policies and procedures. And then I would hit the back office, and the back office would go back to those rules, those policies and procedures, and the friction would happen between the two of us. And lucky them, they never had to interact with a customer. Mm-hmm. So how do you make people that are in divisions that never have to experience the customer care about the customer experience?
Well, I mean, it's ironic, isn't it, Meridith,
Yeah.
that the higher up you get
Yes.
in an organization, the further away you get from the customer.
Right.
And so one of the things I do with like my executive sessions is the first thing I do is pass out a little worksheet when they're sitting down and settling in. And I ask them to describe the last time they interacted with a customer. And you can see them shift in their chairs and get uncomfortable and start looking around. And then they start asking, well, what about internal customers? Or what about this? And it's just to highlight, like, we have to do a better job of that. And, people love that show, Undercover Boss, for this reason, because you start realizing there's so much that we don't really get access to when we're only seeing reports, when we're only seeing measurement, when we're only seeing dashboards. And so one of the things that I stress is a lot of the data and the data-driven decisions of the last couple of decades, there was this movement to almost remove the humanity from the reporting.
Yeah.
And so whenever I look at, a customer experience dashboard or insights or anything, I always stress that we need to include something. And that can be a recording from the contact center. That could be a customer quote. That could be a video that the customer posted. But we need to connect those dots because, I mean, no leader is ever moved to do something emotionally based on a pie chart. Or,
Right.
So we need to keep connecting those dots. The other thing is, if I'm this happens frequently in B2B, where there's some information that some team has, the engineering team has, and they never work with the customer, but the person working with the customer, their account rep or their customer success manager is waiting for them. And they have to keep going back to the customer saying, I'm sorry, I still don't have that information, still don't have that information. And that creates all that friction. Well, if the engineering team has no idea that that's happening, it's easy to keep thinking, oh, that guy from sales, he's on my case, So we have to really include people in understanding what is the actual customer journey, because otherwise it's very easy to just get so siloed and fragmented that we just don't feel like we're a part of it.
Right. So, you talk about the fact that it's everything. So I want to flip it and we'll talk about, so here I am, I'm a company, like, why should I invest in customer experience? Like what, at the end of the day, the biggest thing that I always found from being middle management is that the C-suite cares about the bottom line results and the reports they've got to give to the board or that they've got to give to the shareholders. And anybody on the front line is so ready to give the farm away to take care of the customer. And both sides have their advantages and both sides have their, their take back. So here I am in the C-suite and I've got a board of directors, I've got shareholders breathing down my throat. Like, why should I care?
I mean, I think you're one of the perfect examples of a results-driven leader, right? And so this is great because everything that happens in customer experience leads to better results when it's managed well. And I say that because a lot of times the investments that we've seen are in collecting the feedback and getting what people are saying to us. But humans don't always make sense. We say one thing, we behave differently. And so when we're just collecting that feedback and calling that results, we're missing an opportunity to make a bigger case around strategy. And so when we do this well, when we say, okay, we're going to aim for higher retention, we're going to lower our service costs, that is connected to those results. Every organization in the world wants two things. They want higher revenue and lower expenses. Right. So if you can connect the work back to that's a win. And this has been proven again and again and again. It's recession proof. It's all these things. But the problem, in my opinion, is that it's a little harder math. And what I mean by that is it's easy in sales to say, look at all the sales. But if you're not paying attention to the customers walking out the door who are bad mouthing you as they're doing it, you are losing opportunity that you're not even counting yet. I tell a story in one of my keynotes about, I booked a hotel near an airport because I was landing late and I was about 2 hours from the client. And I booked the hotel for that night for myself. And then my colleague was going to be flying in. So a couple days later, I'd booked 2 nights for 2 people. And I showed up at the hotel and it was one of the worst experiences I ever had. I could not cancel those next 2 nights fast enough, right? So they don't even know that they're missing this opportunity of revenue. And then I kept getting those text surveys. And I was like, I've told you everything. What else do you want me to know? And nobody reached out, nobody tried. And I think that's just a perfect example of the opportunity cost that is missed when we don't really focus on results like that.
Yeah, it's almost like, I always feel like in most organizations that I've been a part of, and it's been a long time since I've been a part of an organization that, I've worked in corporate, but it was almost like this thing that we would put in the budget and we'd sort of hire, but it didn't really get folded into every other part of the organization. But in those days, I don't know that it mattered as much. And the reason was because our competition was 2 other businesses down the street, and that was it. It wasn't sitting around, we weren't dealing with people in third world countries and other parts of the US. I mean, it was a world where corporate controlled the buying cycle rather than the customer controlling, controlling the buying cycle. And so I feel like so much of that, has shifted. So totally when, in your book, so talk a little bit about, what people are going to gain from reading this book, what they're going to learn from reading this book, and, what's their ROI from this book?
Well, I think right now what I see is customer experience is full of good intentions, but good intentions don't lead to results. So I like to think about it as intentional leadership. And in the book, I literally break down, okay, if you want an aligned mindset with your organization, and let's say you're in a big organization, you can start with your team. You can start in smaller ways, but I walk through a template of how to build your customer experience mission statement and then how to use it. So it's not just a something on the wall, you can use it to answer the question, did we live up to this mission or not? And then keep learning and improving as you go. And then how do you build a real strategy around customer experience? And we call that a success blueprint. And it walks through your organizational goals, your leadership goals. How will you measure success? Is this realistic? All of those things. And then the discipline part is really deciding what are the tools in my toolkit that we can use to get these things actually done. And that's things like customer journey mapping, or, reviewing your data in a certain way, or service blueprinting. You just mentioned something with the marketplace shift. I like to say there are two guys with a laptop right now today who are trying to disrupt your industry.
Yes.
And if you are not trying to disrupt your industry, you will be disrupted. So part of our framework is actually ultimately getting to experiential innovation, because you look at the innovators and the disruptors of the last several decades, they've all been experience-based. And so
Yes.
if we are not focused on that, we will be disrupted. We do something called a disruptor day with our clients, which is super fun, because you just throw all the rules out and figure out what could we do if we were doing this differently today. And so I think ultimately all of this leads to staying ahead of your competition, keeping your customers so that not only are they kind of status quo, but they're really excited about moving through the journey with you. And then that also reflects back on your culture, and it helps you become an employer of choice and all those things that we're trying to do too. So when I say it's everything, I really believe it's everything.
Yeah, it really starts in there. Are there any companies today that you think really get it right?
One of my favorite examples lately is Costco. And that's because they are very clear-eyed about who they are, what they offer. They also have incredible leadership. They treat their employees very, very well. And they're also starting to do things that are not necessarily status quo in their industry. A recent example is in California, where there's a housing shortage.
Yeah.
They're literally building housing on top of one of their new warehouses to both provide jobs and housing for an area that needed it. And so they're showing not only who they are with their in-store experience, but they're saying to a broader audience, this is who we want to interact with. This is, how we show up with our values. And I think people really respond to that. And so that's one of my favorite examples lately.
It is hard to believe, but we are basically at the end of this podcast. And I always like to end with two questions. You can answer them in either order. But how do people find out about you? How do they follow your work? How do they get the brand new book when it's out, or pre-order the book? And the second question is, so much uncertainty in the marketplace. I mean, the whole goal of this podcast is to help people shift how they think, feel, and act about uncertainty. What is your greatest piece of advice as people look at the marketplace in 2026? What's your greatest piece of advice to help them turn uncertainty to competitive advantage?
I love that question. I think I'm going to start with that, and then I'll go into the next one. But I think that uncertainty creates a lot of anxiety, not just for us, but for our customers. And so one of the best things that we can do looking into the future is think about what are ways we can reassure proactively our customers that we are there for them, we're looking out for them, and that we are going to continue to value them, and they will reward you for that. So I think that's a great way to approach uncertainty, is just to share reassurance. And then as far as finding me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. Experienceinvestigators.com is the company. And then please pre-order the book. It's experienceiseverythingbook.com. I'm hosting a special 3-week live book club for anybody who pre-orders. So you can find all of that on that site at experienceiseverythingbook.com.
Oh, well, I think this is also a great book for all of us to get for our customers and share with them to help them grow their businesses. Jeanne, as always, you have been amazing. This is such great information. Can't wait to get my copy of Experience is Everything. And thanks to all of you for joining us for another episode of Ask for Change. We'll see you right back here next week. And remember, together, we're going to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. We'll see you next time.